This video we're going to cover all the duelist combos within Marvel Rivals, comparing them to see which of these heroes can kill the fastest. Now this did take a lot of time, so if you do enjoy this style of content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as this took a ton of testing. This does include the season 1.5 damage values, and starting off with the Punisher, we are using his assault rifle and his shotguns. We're basically testing for base damage and critical hits because he can do both with his weapons. And we also tested his turret as well, just because it's one of his abilities that he can use. He doesn't have any combos, so we didn't need to worry too much about that. But as you can see here, when it comes to the actual numbers themselves, the Punisher actually outputs a really good amount of damage without having to do too many complicated combos or anything like that whatsoever. And even just his base assault rifle by itself, if you land a couple of critical hits, you're going to do pretty well in terms of time to kill. Next up, we've got Storm, and Storm did get an adjustment in terms of our TTK numbers with her damage boost, but with her base attack, as you can see here, it does output a decent amount of damage. And we also tested it with the Bolt Rush attack as well as her Goddess boost. Now the Goddess boost with the wind doesn't do much. It only helps when you get the damage boost, which is what got adjusted with this update. Now we had the numbers with before the update and after the update, and there was only a couple of milliseconds of difference. So to be honest, Storm really never actually got nerfed with this whatsoever, and I think she's still going to be an extremely powerful choice inside season 1.5 and beyond. Basically, they never really nerfed this hero in any way, shape or form with the numbers that we had. Getting on into our quick comparison now, as you can see here, the damage boost definitely helps a lot. So when you are trying to take on enemies, try your best to switch to the damage boost. I know sometimes it's not always easy to do that, but it definitely cuts your numbers down significantly, especially when you use the Wind Blade plus the Bolt Rush damage boost. It helps a lot. Next up, we've got Hawkeye, and we tested him spamming the bow, and we also tested it charged up, because I think it's good to test both, because sometimes it depends on the situation you're in. You're going to be using one or the other, and if it's long range, you're probably going to charge it up. If it's closer range, you'd want to spam fire the weapon, so you've got a bit more of a fire rate. And as you can see here, we also tested the hypersonic as well, with the base damage and critical hits on top of that. So we wanted to cover absolutely everything here. And the hypersonic doesn't really do too much extra. It does output a little bit of damage, but as you'll see in just a moment when we compare the numbers and things, it doesn't really do too much. But we also wanted to test a melee combo for close range, especially against dive heroes and things, because he does have a slash that he can use to basically displace enemies. Going over the actual numbers now quickly, spamming the weapon is 6.57 seconds when you're just landing body shots, and then it's 3.41 seconds if you're landing critical hits, so the critical hits definitely help out a ton. If you're basically charging the bow at full 100%, you're going to basically cut your time down in terms of time to kill by 1 second almost, or just a bit over that, which is pretty solid actually. But again, like I said, if you're at close range, sometimes you want to be spam firing your weapon, so it just depends on the situation you are in. Now, comboing this with anything else basically makes your time to kill slower, so you're probably better off 90% of the time just spam firing the weapon and trying to basically get critical hits as much as you can, because the hypersonic attack basically delays your time to kill, so it's kind of pointless pairing it there unless you really need it to get a finish. Next up, we've got Hela. We tested her base attack, and then we also tested critical hits as usual. Then we also tested her secondary fire, which is actually pretty solid at cutting down your time to kill, because it does damage over time. As you can see, it's got a bit of a delay, but then it does reduce that time down a little bit. So as you can see here, we're testing it with critical hits again. We also tested her bubble as well, which is called the Soul Drainer, and just to see if that changed anything, we also tested that again with critical hits, and then we kind of paired all three of these together to see if it gives us some kind of ultimate combo attack, but it doesn't actually. And then again, we done it with critical hits as well. Getting into the actual numbers now, basically using the Piercing Knight, which is her secondary fire, does cut down your time when it comes to the base damage. But when it comes to critical hits, basically it's got a bit of a delay there, so you're always better just firing straight for the head with your primary attack. You're going to kill a little bit quicker just because of the animation times. It's going to make it that you actually kill faster when you're using just critical hits with your primary fire. Getting into Magik now, this is not a hero I use too much, but the good thing about it is that every time you do an attack, you get some heals. We tested the primary fire by itself. Then we also tested the primary fire with kind of essentially a reload cancel or a melee cancel, if you want to call it, because pros are kind of using this. Then we also tested the Eldritch Whirl, which is after you portal. And then we used the uppercut and then the melee cancel again. And then we also tested it with the Demon's Rage as well. So basically portal, Demon's Rage, Umbro, and then the melee cancel attack. And then we basically used the slash as well to basically enter the fight. So we're basically using every single one of our abilities essentially at this point to then do it with the Eldritch Whirl. We also tested it again with the Demon's Rage. And we wanted to just cover absolutely everything you could do with Magik, just to see what the numbers would look like. Then we tested the slash with the Umbro Incursion and then the Soul Sword melee cancel as well. Getting into the actual numbers of Magik then, when it comes to using the primary attack, you can cut down some time by doing the melee cancel, so you might as well do it. You shave off a second. Now, if you are using the portal, then the best thing to use always is Demon's Rage. As much as Eldritch Whirl basically knocks back enemies, if you're trying to output the most amount of damage every single time, Demon's Rage is going to help you do that. So I recommend using Demon's Rage over Eldritch Whirl every single time you portal with Magik. Not only that, it's basically an instant lock on, and it just helps you deal damage without you having to actually physically do anything extra. Next up, we've got Moon Knight, and we fired the Crescent Darts at a base attack, basically straight into the enemy this time. And then we also done it with critical hits as well, which is very important. Then we also done the Moonblade combo, which is basically firing the Moonblade first, then Crescent Darts on base. Then we fired the Moonblade to the head, so doing critical damage. And then we also done the Unk Dart attack, which basically you fire into the Unk. And then we also done the Moonblade combo with that as well. So that is basically all his combos. Comparing all the numbers for Moon Knight now, and as you can see, he does output a good amount of damage anyway, so even if you're doing any one of these attacks, I think you'll be pretty good for the most part, as long as you can land your hits. If you are trying to land critical hits, then you're definitely going to do significantly better, especially if you combo in the Moonblade in there as well. But if you are using the Unk, as you can see, basically you are cutting your time down significantly because you're pretty much landing every single hit, and you're not going to be missing any shots. But not only that, it bounces a few times, so you're going to get extra damage by using an Unk. And the Moonblade doesn't really significantly boost your time to kill anyway, even though it does make it shorter, it's not by much. Next up, we've got Squirrel Girl, which is going to be a really popular hero in season 1.5 in my opinion. Basically, she does do splash damage, so we tested that. We also tested direct hits as well, because I think that's really important to note. And then we also tested her squirrel attacks to see if that gives you a little extra boost in damage. Quickly comparing these now, as you can see, the splash damage still does pretty decent, especially if there's going to be a lot of enemies nearby. But if you're only attacking one enemy, then you definitely want to aim for direct impact hits, because they're going to cut down your time significantly in terms of time to kill. The blockade doesn't really help too much, so it's kind of pointless. You just want to land your hits. Next up, we've got Black Widow, and she's got her melee baton, which basically we tested by itself to see how long it would take to kill Groot. And then we also tested her with the kicks that she has as well with the melee baton. I think that's important to combo this in if you do want to. It also has a knockback effect as well, so I think that's something to keep in mind. Then we tested the base sniper rifle, basically body shots only. And then we also tested the sniper rifle doing critical hits only as well, which I think is really important. So getting into the actual numbers now, as you can see here, when it comes to that kind of melee attack, especially against high HP heroes, it's kind of pointless, to be honest. And when it comes to dealing damage with a sniper rifle, again, when it comes to high HP heroes, it's not the best unless you're landing critical hits, and that means you need to land 4 consecutive critical hits on the enemy to basically completely deplete their health. Very hard hero to use, especially against tanks. Next up, we've got Iron Man, and we tested him with his new damage values, and he actually cuts down his time to kill by 2 seconds with the Unibeam. Then we also tested his repulsor base as well, and then we also had the overdrive version of the repulsor and the Unibeam with the missiles as well. I think it's important to add that in because it does give you a little bit extra damage. Getting into the actual numbers now, Iron Man's time to kills, especially after this update, are absolutely insane, especially for a ranged hero. Now, obviously he does have some damage drop-offs, but at that kind of closer range, he just outputs insane amounts of damage. So his Unibeam is 6.13 seconds, which is fast. His Repulsor, again, is very fast. If you're using the Overdrive, basically it's just as quick, so it's not really going to reduce your time to kill all that much unless you're using the Unibeam. But again, he kills super quick. Next up, we've got a bit of an easy one with the Scarlet Witch, but there is an important thing I do want to mention with this hero actually. So our Chaos Control does take a bit of time, as you can see. You do want to make sure you combo in her burst attack, but there's a particular way you want to do this to maximize the amount of damage you're actually outputting. You basically want to use it in between the Chaos Control, so you're basically firing one, Chaos Control, firing one, but that's after you burst the first four. So you burst the first four, then after that, you basically start firing as soon as you get the recharge every single time. And as you can see there, you cut down the time quite significantly in my opinion. So basically fire one after you reload it, and that gives you 6.42 seconds of a time to kill, which is actually pretty respectable. Next up, we've got Winter Soldier. We calculated his base damage and also his critical hit damage as well, just to see what that would look like if you're firing accurate shots. We also then tested a couple of different combos. As you can see here, we used the grapple, then the hook, then the voltage, and also basically all of his abilities in the one go. Then we also did the tainted voltage with firing base damage at range, because this is going to basically cancel your reload. And then we also done his combo that most people use, which is the hook, then firing your gun melee, then the uppercut, and then finishing him off with a gun as well. And then basically calculating all these together and taking a look at them, his combo at the very bottom does help out, especially if you're trying to basically displace enemies, especially tanks, because he has a tank buster. And if you are just firing the weapon, you're going to get a very similar time to kill as well. So overall, he's very consistent with his damage, which is really good. Unless you're landing critical hits, you will get faster time to kills. Next up, we've got a really easy one with Star-Lord. If you're firing your gun, basically we tested base damage, and then we also tested critical hits as well. And basically we also tried our best to test without having to add in the reloads with his flips, which is called Stellar Shift. And it does seem to work if you're able to track and lock onto enemies very quickly afterwards, but that's going to depend on your skill and how much playtime you've had with Star-Lord in the first place. So as you can see here, his base damage is really good, to be honest, especially for only landing body shots. If you land a couple of headshots, you're going to get really quick time to kills, but as you can see, critical hits help out significantly. And then Stellar Shift does help because it takes away your reload time, but again, this is going to be how quickly you acquire the enemy afterwards. When it comes to Namor, we tested a lot here actually with this hero, because we tested his base trident damage. We also tested his critical hit trident damage. We also tested his combo with his secondary fire as well, because you can actually animation cancel that. So we wanted to see what that looked like with the base damage and also critical hits as well. Then we also tested him with the turrets. We also wanted to see what it would look like when he's outputting damage with 2 turrets and also 1 turret. We also done base damage and critical hits, because when you do land critical hits with Namor, the turrets actually fire faster and they get a damage boost. So basically you need to keep that in mind. So they get a damage boost when you land critical hits, and they also get a damage boost when you use your secondary fire. So that is something that you need to remember when you are using this hero. So we basically wanted to calculate all of that to see how much quicker do you get kills when you have a turret available or 2 with Namor, and if there's a difference between 1 or 2 turrets in general. Now this hero is quite a complex one when it comes to damage output, to be honest, and it took quite a while to understand everything that's going on with this one. So looking at the numbers now, and you might want to pause this screen here actually when you're reading through this, but as you can see here, when using the trident and getting critical hits, you're getting an extremely good time to kill. You want to make sure you at least get a couple of critical hits if you're not using any turrets or any other attacks. If you're using the trident with the base with 2 turrets, you're actually getting his optimal time to kill in my opinion, because you don't need to land any critical hits here. If you do land critical hits, you are going to cut that time down significantly. Then if you use his trident with the wrath secondary fire essentially, you cut that time down even further. So basically, as long as you're using all of his abilities, you're going to get good times here. One thing I do want to mention is that if you do use his single turret, I think that's good enough in terms of a time to kill. So if you use the base attack with a single turret, as long as you always have one turret in rotation, I still think you're getting a very reasonable time to kill with Namor. Especially if you have your secondary fire there as well, you're actually getting a pretty decent one. But obviously the best and most optimal way is if you use his secondary fire with 2 turrets. That is the quickest time to kill you're going to get with Namor without needing to land any critical hits. Next up, we've got Psylocke, who's going to be a really popular hero for the second half of the season in my opinion. Base damage we tested on our primary attack. We also tested critical hits as well, which is very important. But I do want to mention that you can land critical hits pretty easily with this hero as well. We also tested our shurikens as well with our primary fire. We did that base and critical hits, and then we also tested it with dashes in between. Especially if you're at close range, this is probably a combo that people will be using to try and take out enemies at that closer range. When it comes to the actual numbers now, I'll be perfectly honest, all of these attack numbers are actually very good. So even if you're using the base attack with nothing else, you're actually going to output really good damage with Psylocke, and that is why she feels so good. But if you do use the shurikens in between that, or if you do land 1 or 2 critical hits, then you're going to be getting significantly better numbers. So again, this hero is just really solid when it comes to damage output, so you don't really need to try too hard and do too much. Next up, we've got Wolverine. We tested him from 0 rage and building it up on the enemy that you're trying to fight, because this could be a scenario that you catch yourself in. We also then tested him with having 100 rage, just to see how much damage you output doing that. Then we also used the vicious rampage in between attacks every time it charged up. Then we also used the feral leap and tested that, and then we used all 3, which is the main combo most people use to try and steal enemy tanks and kill them. Getting on into the numbers now, Wolverine, I think it's really important that you try your best to start at 100 rage when you're trying to kill an enemy, or as close as you can to 100 rage, because you're going to be outputting way more damage doing that. Now, his vicious rampage, which is basically his dash attack, is really important as well. It cuts down his TTK significantly as well, so try and use that as much as you can. The timer on that is pretty quick too, so you can use it as much as you want. His feral leap though does take a little bit of time to recharge, but as you can see here, it does cut down his times as well, because you get the faster strikes after you basically land. So that's something that you can make use of, but you don't get it as often as you do with the vicious rampage. Next up, we've got Iron Fist, and we're going to make a whole guide on Iron Fist because I think he's actually a really solid hero now. But as you can see, we tested his primary attack. We also tested his kick with his primary attack. Then we also tested his kind of like rapid fire punches attack with the kick as well. And I really want to point out the fact that he's actually a really solid tank buster now. He basically just outputs so much damage, and obviously he's got a lot of survivability, but like I said, we'll cover that in our full guide when we do release that. Looking at the actual numbers now, what's really important to know is that when you are using his secondary attack, which is the one that allows him to punch really fast, you're actually outputting some insane amounts of damage to tanks over time. It's just ridiculous how good he actually is now. And like I said, you want to make sure when you are fighting those high HP heroes that you are using that ability on them, and then saving your standard attack for the lower HP characters. Mr. Fantastic is a really strange one, and it bothers me that people actually like using this hero, because when it comes to his damage output, it's actually not the best when it comes to a DPS duelist in this game. As you can see here, his stretch punches do take a while to kill Groot, and then also his grapple does take a while as well. So we tested the grapple just with the stretch punches, and as you can see here, we're building up the meter, but sometimes we kill Groot before we can even get the meter build up, unless you're using a specific combo. So next up, we're using the elongation twice. This gives you a little bit of shields whilst you're fighting as well. And again, by the time you kind of build up the meter to 100%, you've pretty much already killed Groot in the first place. You only need to land the last couple of shots to then basically finish him off. Now, obviously this is not a game scenario, so sometimes you could already have your meter filled up before you even get to the tank, but it's just something I do want to point out in the first place. If you use one elongation, this is what it looks like as well. So what you want to always do here, because the time to kills are pretty much exactly the same, it doesn't matter how you use his abilities, is that you want to basically try and get to his bubble ability as fast as you possibly can, because it's just going to give you extra HP shields Getting on into the numbers now, as you can see, they're very consistently the same, more or less. It doesn't really matter how much you combo this, so you want to make sure you're using his final combo, which is the last one on this list here. And that basically puts you in his tank vanguard form as quick as possible. Now, sometimes obviously you will be fighting a tank and you already have this ability activated, so this is not an in-game scenario, but if you are starting from scratch, then you do have pretty slow time to kills with Mr. Fantastic. Next up, we've got the new guy, which is the Human Torch. We use this cluster fire for base attacks. We also use cluster fire for critical hits because he does get critical hits. This is like a shotgun spread, so it's kind of hard to make sure everything is landing at the same time. We used one Blazing Blast to do some tick damage, and then we also tested it for base and critical hits. We used 2 and 3 Blazing Blasts to see if we get any extra damage bonuses by doing that as well. We just want to make sure we absolutely cover everything here. Then we also tested the exact same thing again with critical hits, so that's 1, 2 and 3 Blazing Blasts to doing tick damage whilst you're doing the critical hits. And then we also done his Meteor Dive with 1 Blazing Blast and then basically some base damage with his primary fire, just to see how it would actually work. And we also used the Pyro Prison just to see if that gives you any damage boosts as well. Getting on into the numbers again, and you might want to pause here when it comes to the Human Torch. If you're looking at his numbers, they're all pretty consistently the same. The Blazing Blasts don't really do too much when it comes to using 1, 2 or 3. And it's all within kind of like a margin of error here anyway, to be honest, when it comes to milliseconds and things. So realistically, you want to use 1 Blazing Blast just to make sure you are getting a little bit extra tick damage. Don't use any more than that on one hero, it's kind of pointless. And then if you're using the Blazing Blast with critical hits, then obviously you're going to get a little bit extra damage done there as well. The Meteor Strike doesn't really deal that much damage in and of itself. So obviously you need to finish off the enemy by using your primary attack or the Blazing Blast. The Pyro Prison again doesn't actually change the amount of damage you do, it just gives you AoE damage. So this is where this video took some time, because these melee combo based heroes are very hard to kind of judge TTKs on. So we did our best here. We done the Vibranium Claws by themselves just to see what it would look like. We also done that basically using his melee in between as well, just to see if that gives us any extra damage or any quicker TTKs by any means at all with Black Panther, which it doesn't really help, to be honest. Then we also done his fastest combo, which is the Spear Dash. We done that twice, the Spin Kick, then the Dash, then the Spear Dash again, and then we finished the enemy off with the Vibranium Claws, and then a quick dash just to finish him off there. And that is on basically Groot, who's got high HP. If you use a smaller tank or even smaller heroes, you will get faster time to kills, of course, because the way Black Panther works, he deals a high amount of initial burst damage, and that is because of his combos. Now, as you can see, all of his combos are on screen just now. The bottom one is with Doctor Strange, so don't confuse this with a quicker time to kill. So essentially his time to kill is not the fastest, but what you want to know about Black Panther is that he's really hard to hit. So basically by you doing all these fast movements, you're not that easy of a target to hit in the first place, because you're basically moving and attacking at the exact same time. Kind of what makes him hard to use in the first place. But when it comes to the actual numbers for Black Panther, as you can see, he doesn't have fast time to kills, and that's because he does move really quickly and he's hard to hit. So even though you're outputting damage, people are not really going to be able to damage you. And there's basically been times where I've been fighting a Black Panther and I have no clue where he even went. So that is how this hero is supposed to be used, and he's supposed to be used to take out lower HP heroes, not tanks. But even if you do take out a tank, then you do have a combo that lasts a good enough amount of time to kill them. So as you can see, he's not got the fastest TTK, but he can kill a tank with a combo. Last but not least, we've got Spider-Man. We tested his primary attack, which is basically his punches, and then he's got a kick at the end of it. We also tested this with his web debuff as well, which gives you bonus damage if you hit the enemy whilst they're stuck with that. So as you can see here, it does a little bit extra damage using the web cluster at the same time. We also then tested the primary attack with the uppercut as well, because obviously that's something you will be using with Spider-Man, not only for movement but also to deal damage, as you can see here. So every time the uppercut refresh, we try and add that into our combo attack here. And then we also done the exact same test again, but we also add in the web cluster as well. just to make sure we're covering absolutely everything and trying to deal as much damage as possible. Then we try to do a quick combo with Spider-Man. I'm not the best Spider-Man player at all, by the way. So we done a get over here with the basically uppercut punches, and we used the web cluster at the same time. So we basically used everything that Spider-Man has to offer. Here are the numbers, and like I said, when it comes to Black Panther and Spider-Man, I'm not the best at using these heroes, so you probably could shave down this time if you can combo a bit quicker than me. And as you can see here, the best thing to do with Spider-Man is to use his web clusters to deal a little bit extra damage. This goes for every single attack you use, so even if you're using the base attack, use his web clusters in between it. If you are putting in uppercuts here and there, then obviously use the web clusters in between it. And if you are using a combination of anything else that he does, make sure you use his web clusters because they will help you deal a bit more damage. Getting on into our comparison now, I don't want to waste too much time on this. I just want to point out the more important ones and the reasons I want to point them out in the first place. So first of all, when it comes to damage, and the way I like to kind of calculate damage is basically who outputs the most damage with the easiest possible attacks, essentially, without having to do anything too crazy. Now, those heroes are going to be Punisher. Punisher does a fantastic job at doing that. Hela's okay as well, but there's better heroes now. Moon Knight's fantastic at doing this, using his unks. He outputs a great amount of time to kill. Squirrel Girl's great as well. Iron Man's now fantastic as well with his adjustments. Star-Lord's always been great. Namor's good if you have 2 turrets available. Psylocke's absolutely insane right now. Wolverine, you need to have the 100 rage, and I don't think that you're not always going to have that. And so it's dependent on how skillful you are with Wolverine. Iron Fist, absolutely insane. Best tank buster in the game in my opinion now. Mr. Fantastic is terrible. Human Torch outputs great damage. Now, when it comes to the other heroes like Black Panther and Spider-Man, it's important to know that they're mainly used for taking out the lower HP heroes, and also they're supposed to jump in, deal a quick burst of damage and then leave. You're not actually supposed to finish off enemies with these guys. So that is why they have burst damage capabilities, which means that they do combos and all that kind of thing. So it depends on what you're actually looking for, but for the most part, most people playing DPS want to kill opponents, and to do that, take Punisher, take Moon Knight, take Squirrel Girl, take Iron Man, take Star-Lord, Namor, Psylocke, and Iron Fist, and you're going to be sorted, and Human Torch is great as well. So there we have it. Those are all the heroes compared. I probably have missed a few combos and things, but this is a very long video to begin with. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and thank you very much for watching.